I picked out 6 or 7 that by the handwriting I thought might be the promised letters, especially as one of them was addressed to Basket, the king's printer, and another to some stationer. We arrived in London the 24th December 1724. I waited upon the stationer, who came first in my way, delivering the letter as from Governor Keith. Quote, "I don't know such a person," said he, but opening the letter, "Oh, this is from Ridleston. I have lately found him to be a complete rascal, and I will have nothing to do with him, nor receive any letters from him." So, putting the letter into my hand, he turned on his heel and left me to serve some customer. I was surprised to find these were not the governor's letters, and after recollecting and comparing circumstances, I began to doubt his sincerity. I found my friend Denham, and opened the whole affair to him. He let me into Keith's character, told me that there was not the least probability that he had written any letters for me at all, and that no one who knew him had the smallest dependence on him. And he laughed at the idea of the governor's giving me a letter of credit, having, as he said, no credit to give. On my expressing some concern about what I should do, he advised me to endeavor getting some employment in the way of my business. "Among the printers here," said he, "you will improve yourself, and when you return to America, you will set up to a greater advantage." Both of us happened to know, as well as the stationer, that Ridleston, the attorney, was a very knave. But what shall we think of a governor playing such pitiful tricks, and imposing so grossly on a poor ignorant boy? It was a habit he had acquired. He wished to please everybody, and having little to give, he gave expectations. He was otherwise an ingenious man, sensible man, a pretty good writer, and a good governor for the people. Several of our best laws were of his planning, and passed during his administration. Ralph and I were inseparable companions. We took lodgings together in Little Britain at 3 shillings and 6 pence a week, and so forth, and he let me know his intentions of remaining in London. Didn't plan on going back at all. He borrowed occasionally a little bit of cash from me to subsist on while he was looking for work. He first endeavored to work in a playhouse as an actor. Then he tried to work as a publisher in Paterson Row, to write for a weekly paper. Then he tried employment as a hackney writer to copy the stationers and lawyers about the temple. He couldn't find any work. For myself, says Ben, for myself, I immediately got into work at Palmer's, a famous printing house in Bartholomew Close, where I continued near a year. I was pretty diligent, but I spent with Ralph a good deal of my earnings at play and public amusements. He seemed quite to have forgotten his wife and child. My engagements with Miss Reed, to whom I never wrote more than 1 letter, and that was to let her know that I was not returning soon. This was another of the great errata of my life, which I could wish to correct if I were to live it over again. In fact, by our expenses, I was constantly kept unable to pay my passage back. So he says, basically, he could have gone back to Philadelphia, and he had the young lady who he was engaged to there. And he only wrote to her once, just to say, "I'm not coming back." While I lodged in Little Britain, I made an acquaintance with one Wilcox, a bookseller, whose shop was next door. And it says this guy's got a big, immense collection of books, and this is in the days before lending libraries, or lending bookshops. And he worked out this deal with the guy, that he could borrow the books, and as long as he brought them back, on some sort of a deal, to their mutual benefit. He says he forgets what it is now, but he esteemed himself greatly on the advantage he got of this. Now, he wrote a little pamphlet on some current events, and he got into the hands of one man named Lyons, a surgeon, author of a book entitled The Infallibility of Human Judgment. And Mr. Lyon took Ben Franklin down to a pale ale house in Lane, Cheapsdale, and met this guy, and then he took him over here to meet this other guy, introduced me to Mr. Pemberton at Batson's Coffee House, who promised to give me an opportunity, sometime or other, of seeing Sir Isaac Newton. How do you like that? So Ben Franklin struck up this friendship with a guy who took him to meet a guy who said he'll take him to meet Isaac Newton. of which I was extremely desirous, but this never happened. So, now Isaac Newton's groundbreaking work, the Principia, I believe, Principia, was published in 1687, and the United States Constitutional Convention was in 1787. So, if Newton published that in 1687, in the early 1700s, he's got to be a fairly old man, huh? And then he talks about a young woman who housed in their lodge, and his friend, Ralph, kind of fell in with her. They used to go to read plays together and stuff, and they actually ended up getting a place together, and they didn't have enough room, they didn't have enough money, pardon me, to support themselves, and Ralph ended up going out for jobs and staying away days at a time. So Ralph is now a schoolmaster somewheres, and he thinks this isn't a very reputable business. So he gets, he sends a letter to Ben at some point, and he says, if you write back to me, direct your letter to Franklin, Mr. Franklin, the schoolmaster at such a place. He had taken on Ben's name because he didn't want to be associated, his name to be associated with that profession if he were to change his profession in the future to something more reputable. So anyways, now Mrs. T, Ralph's lady, used to send for Ben once in a while, and he says, I grew fond of her company. She used to borrow money when he could afford it. I grew fond of her company, and being at that time under no religious restraint, and taking advantage of my importance to her, I attempted to take some liberties with her, another erratum of my life, which she repulsed with a proper degree of resentment. So he hits on his girl's, or his friend's wife. He hits on her. And she says no, and she writes to Ralph and tells Ralph about the conduct. Now, this is an interesting point in Franklin's life. He got in quite a few he was a little bit of a flirt early on, and he actually says later he's very lucky he didn't catch some dreadful disease in his youth. And that's the only thing they talk about nowadays. That's the only thing that you learn about Thomas Jefferson. He slept with his slaves. Benjamin Franklin was a flirt and went to romping, went to whoring, as they called it then, and that's like the only thing that they have of value to talk about with the presidents now. So anyways, you see that as just a little detail inside of a really great autobiography of him here. So Ralph, when he returned to London, he let me know that he considered all of his obligations that he had to me as to be annulled, from which I concluded I was never to expect his repaying the money I had lent him, or that I had advanced for him. This, however, was of little consequence, as he was totally unable to pay anyway. Now he says, I left Palmer's printing house to work at Watt's printing house near Lincoln's Inn Fields, a still greater printing house than Palmer's. Here I continued all the rest of my stay in London. And he says that the people in this printing house drink quite a bit. They drink beer with breakfast, lunch, dinner. He says, I drink only water. The other workmen, near 50 in number, were great drinkers of beer. On occasion, I carried up and down stairs a large form of type in each hand, when the others carried but one in both hands. And they wondered to see from this in several instances that the water American, as they called me, was stronger than themselves, who drink strong beer. My companion at the press drank every day a pint before breakfast, a pint at breakfast with his bread and cheese, a pint between breakfast and dinner, a pint at dinner, a pint in the afternoon about 6, and another pint when he had done his day's work. I thought it a detestable custom, but it was necessary, he supposed, to drink strong beer that he might be strong to labor. So this was an expense, he says, I was free from, and thus these poor devils keep themselves always under. And he talks about how they used to run out of money before the end of the week and would actually borrow money from Ben, and he would say, I'll borrow you the money to buy a drink today, but day after tomorrow when we get paid, you got to pay me back so and so much, and he would make a little profit off of their drinking. So they were then even poorer, and he didn't feel so bad.